So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second part of the day. As you can see, I'm way too old for a PhD student, and nevertheless, it's my pleasure to chair this session, and I would like to introduce to you Krzysztof Nowodka. I really hope that I do pronounce it in the right way, Krzysztof. Thank you so much. He is a professor for ancient history at the University of Wrocław. His main research interests are Greek epigraphy, as we heard yesterday, and Alexander III and his legacy and legend, Greek democracy, and the history of Miletos. And today he will give his talk about burning temples. Please welcome Krzysztof Nowodka.
Okay, thank you very much, Kai. And not being an Achaemenid scholar, I'm particularly grateful to Robert Rolling and Rahim Shaigan for trusting in me and inviting me here. And of course, great thanks go to Astrid, who has been perfect as always she is. So thank you very much again. And it struck me that that's the first Herodotus paper during this conference. I thought that half of the papers will be on Herodotus, but this hasn't been the case. So let me try then.
It's an advantage, you know.
Okay. Within his account of Greco-Persian hostilities in Asia Minor, Herodotus relates burning of two major temples. No, much? Yes. In Sardis and Didyma, committed by the rebellious Ionians and Persians respectively. For the first episode, Herodotus is our only source. Burning of the temple in Sardis has attracted much attention of modern scholarship as the prime episode in the Herodotean series of acts of revenge, galvanizing both sides of the war between Europe and Asia. Herodotus singles out the burning of the temple in Sardis as the principal reason for invading Greece, as stated in the speech of Xerxes. Strabo goes even further, stating that Xerxes burned all temples, presumably in Asia Minor, except for Ephesus. The issue is, of course, whether the words of Herodotus related to any degree to real designs or at least propaganda of Xerxes, or if it was rather a reflection of the importance of the half-successful attack on Sardis in Greek historical memory. In the first is true burning of Didyma, the principal temple of the Milesians, the instigators of the revolt and leaders of the attack on Sardis, would be a prime example of just revenge. The meaning of these two acts, assigned to them by Herodotus, should be studied in the context of the historical events of the early 5th century BCE. Hence, this paper will start with establishing what happened in Sardis and in Didyma and when. The fate of Didyma is not a mean thing. In the Archaic Age, the only rival of the oracle of Apollo housed in his temple in Didyma was Delphi. In Hellenistic and Roman times, the position of Didyma rose, gradually outstripping Delphi. It was routinely listed among the most prestigious and infallible oracles of the ancient world, the one which enjoyed exceptional privileges in the imperial age and the religious establishment famous for meaningful relations with some of the mightiest people on earth, and Seleucus I, Antiochus I, Trajan, Diocletian, Julian, perhaps Augustus. No wonder that the lot that befell it engendered interest among a number of ancient authors. The fate of Didyma is known from two lines of contradictory literary sources, and this paper will refer to archaeological and indirect epigraphic evidence in an attempt to untangle the dispute as to the circumstances and meaning of the events at Didyma. The burning of temple in Sardis was the major episode of the initial stage of the Ionian rebellion. In 498, the Ionians, aided by small detachments from Athens and Eretria, set off from Caicos and took Sardis unopposed by Artaphernes, who concentrated on holding the citadel. Plutarch tells us, after Lysanias, that the Ionians made the expedition to raise the siege of Miletus, and modern scholarship is quite skeptical about its historicity. So we may only guess what was the real aim of the daring expedition against Sardis. Was it because Sardis was perceived as the key point of the Persian power in the West, or the center of power of Artaxerxes? Surely Greek forces were not sufficient to take by storm the formidable citadel of Sardis, and if the aim was to incite a Lydian rebellion, it failed during the events of Sardis, when fire started by a Greek soldier consumed all of the former capital of Lydia, including the temple of the goddess called Kubaba by Herodotus. This Herodotus says, at later point, gave the Persians a pretext to burn Greek temples. The deity worshipped in Sardis was Kubaba, a Phrygian goddess known from local graffiti as Kubaba. Lynn Roller showed convincingly that Kubaba was well known to the Greeks of Western Asia Minor. Worship of Kubaba-type mother goddess among the Ionians speaks against burning of her shrine in Sardis as a deliberate act, confirming the basic veracity of Herodotus on this point. The first temple on the Greek side burned by the Persians was Didyma, and I'm quoting here Herodotus, and the temple at Didyma with its shrine and place of divination was plundered and burned. Herodotus does not say who exactly was culpable for destroying the Didymaeon. However, since the phrase belongs to the paragraph devoted to the destruction and depopulation of Miletos in 494, it is generally understood that Herodotus attributed the burning and despoiling of the temple in Didyma to generals of Darius I. The earliest testimony in the second line of the historiographic tradition attributing the burning of the temple of Apollo to Xerxes is Kallisthenes. I will not read all of it, but only part of the English text. Kallisthenes adds that when Apollo had deserted the oracle among the Branchidai, on the temple being plundered by the Branchidai who espoused the party of the Persians in the time of Xerxes, and the spring had failed, and so on. Further testimonies on plundering of Didyma by Xerxes are Strabo, Suda, and indirectly Pausanias. A bronze astragalus inscribed with a 6th century BC dedication to Apollo found in Susa may have been a part of the Persian plunder from Didyma, but its date is not precise enough to support either of the versions of the despoiling of Didyma. The version of Xerxes plundering Didyma is anchored in two historiographical traditions. The one concerned with the treachery and punishment of the Branchidai, which is Kallisthenes, and that about the abduction and restoration of a statue from Didyma, which is Pausanias. Curtius Rufus knew the story of the treachery of the Branchidai and their ties to Xerxes too, and so did Diodorus and some other ancient authors. Even if this does not strengthen substantially its credence, at least it testifies to its popularity in the early imperial age. Nothing proves the textual affiliation of the stories known from Kallisthenes and Pausanias. More likely, they represent two independent source traditions opposed to Herodotus. However, they are related in the sense that removing the cult statue of Apollo and his guardians from Didyma was tantamount to transferring the god from the outskirts of the Persian Empire to its center. Most modern scholars accept the version of Herodotus on account of being the earlier source, further alleging that Kallisthenes substituted Darius with Xerxes, because in the Greek tradition, Xerxes was the arch-evil blamed for sacrilegious burning of temples. However, Herodotus was not an eyewitness to the events in Miletus, or Didyma, he relates, and he had to rely on earlier sources as much as Kallisthenes and Pausanias. Hence, the shorter time between the actual events and the composing of the accounts is not sufficient reason to select Herodotus over Kallisthenes. The ultimate source of the tradition adhered to by Kallisthenes may be Ktesias. Photius' summary of Ktesias' account of Xerxes read from Greece reads, this I have to read in Greek, Xerxes de perasas eis tenasian kai apelaunon eis Sardis epempe megabizon en to en delphos hieron silesai. The three issues need to be considered here in this context. Firstly, according to Ktesias, Delphi had already been attacked by Bardonius, who suffered death in a storm set by Apollo. This is highly questionable, it's untrue simply. Two Xerxes ordered attacks on Delphi are extremely unlikely, if only because they would have contravened the general Persian policy towards sanctuaries. The related story of the divine retribution may in fact belong either in the time after the Battle of Plataea or in the age around 400 when Delphi was revising its self-image. On top of that, the fragment relates that the events after the Battle of Plataea, which makes Persian military operation in central Greece unlikely. Friedrich Reuss, trying to find a way out of this confusion, as we know it, by attributing an error to Photius' reading of the original text, which mentioned a temple of Apollo, presumably one in Asia, and this god could only be Didyma. Royce is probably right, but this still leaves us with a question of the original source perused by Ktesias. We can only say that Ktesias had access to Persian sources and that he would use earlier Greek authors, for instance, Xanthos, a mid-5th century author of the Lydiaca, but we really don't know. The greater evidence for the date of the collapse of Didyma in 479 is sufficient to outweigh Herodotus of its own. But so now, archaeology. Excavations in Miletos attest widespread destruction of major temples. In the temple of Athena near the theater harbor, in the temple of Aphrodite of Zeytin Tepe, where an extensive ash layer dated after 500 has been identified in the temple of Apollo Delphinios. Hence, the evidence gathered in the three major temples of archaic Miletus confirms an extensive early 5th century destruction and fire damage that is unexplainable outside of the Persian siege of 494. Massive quantity of Persian time bronze arrowheads were found in the central area of archaic Miletus, chiefly on Kalabak Tepe and Zeytin Tepe. A large part of them can be assigned to strata of 494 and later, in a further testimony to the Persian attack in 494. But this is not the case in Didyma, where archaeology does not attest the destruction or thorough burning of the main temple in the early 5th century. The fire destruction in the archaic hall, in which offerings were kept, may attest to the act of despoiling of the Didymaion. The traces of fire in the archaic Apollo's temple were limited, hence once cleaned and repaired, the temple could be used for another 150 years. Therefore, archaeology disproves Herodotus' statement about the burning of the temple of Didyma, which undercuts the veracity of his whole account of its fate. Although epigraphy supplies no direct evidence on the date of the despoiling of the temple of Apollo, the quantitative study of Milesian inscriptions may give some clues to the fate of Didyma. Okay, inscribing begins early. Then we have a relative epigraphic maximum in the second half of the 6th century, and then there is a rapid drop. Okay, after 500, and then again after 475. This is done by quarter centuries. Now, this is all relative, but remember that this epigraphic maximum is highest between the 8th century and 325, and this epigraphic minimum is the lowest between the 7th century BC and late 4th century AD. So, seen through the overall picture, this is significant, even if numbers are not big. The sudden drop in inscribing is unsurprising, bearing in mind the destruction of Miletus, the total termination of inscribing in Didyma is less obvious. It looks that Milesians stopped to dedicate and to ask for oracular responses, as if Didyma fell out of graces with their polis from the beginning of the Ionian revolt, perhaps on account of the pro-Persian stance of the Branchidai. Inscribing in Didyma stayed very weak until the end of the 4th century. So this is another significant phenomenon. The rival literary traditions and archaeological evidence seem to suggest that Didymaion was not burnt at all, just despoiled of its treasures and abandoned by its guardians, the Branchidai, who disappeared from sources in the early 5th century to reappear in Sogdiana under Alexander. The resettlement of the Branchidai to Central Asia, more likely voluntary than enforced by the Persians, would be congruous with their attested pro-Persian attitude. Okay, and the last item is of evidence is Tacitus, who relates a request made by the Milesians to the Senate, referring to the privilege granted by Darius. The evidence is late, but in general reliable. The arguments brought by the Milesians are striking. Quite obviously, the local tradition of Darius was much more favorable than it would have been had he destroyed Didymaion, as Herodotus claims. The evidence of Tacitus and the attested pro-Persian attitude of the Branchidai speak against the majority opinion that the Didymaion suffered the same punishment as Miletos in 494. In all probability, the Branchidai continued to run Didyma until 479, when the temple was despoiled and the Branchidai resettled to Sogdiana. The episodes of the fire destruction inflicted upon Kubaba's shrine in Sardis and Apollo's shrine in Didyma belonged in the long line of stories of burning of enemy temples in Greco-Persian wars. According to Herodotus, in all cities save Samos, and in all cities of Ionia, in Eretria, in Naxos under Darius, and in 12 cities of Phocis, all sanctuaries in Athens and Attica under Xerxes. From the point of view of Athens in the age of Herodotus and later, the symbolic importance of attack on Sardis and of burning of the temple of Kubaba was paramount. In his expounding of logical sequence of events, Aristotle uses the episode of Athenians and Eretrians' attack on Sardis as an obvious example of the starting point of the chain of events leading to war on Athens. The same line of argument survives in writing of the Augustan age, obviously drawing on earliest accounts, Cornelius Nepos and Diodorus. The idea of Athenian assistance to Ionians as the reason of later Persian invasions appears also in Orosius, who most probably drew upon Pompeius Trogus. It is immaterial that not everything in Didyma was burnt, or that little was burnt, actually. The destruction we know of and the later inactivity of the famous temple and oracles, silent once its guardians, the Branchidai, were settled to Sogdiana, was the sufficient historical foundation of the chain of events known from Herodotus and later authors. The burning of the most important shrine of Apollo in Asia Minor served double purpose in Herodotus' account. First, it was the obvious first act of the Persian revenge, followed by the destruction by fire of all other temples in Ionia and with the culmination of burning of Athenian shrines. Then it provides a historical underpinning of Herodotean historiography. The Didyma episode follows the account of the destruction of Miletus and enslavement of its population, but not directly. The two episodes are interspersed with a short report on an unusual oracle concerning two communities, Milesian and Argives, issued at Delphi. In this oracle, Miletus is called contriver of evil deeds, and it collapse, humiliation, and transfer of its shrine at Didyma to alien hands are predicted. The result of this oracle was that Argos did not want to get involved in the war on the side by Toulouse. This is an example quite common of Herodotus of things happening because they had to happen. The nature of this evil deed, this has been discussed profusely in modern literature, but no generally accepted solution has been proposed. One recent Milesian act of impiety was unprovoked, burning of the temple in Sardis. Its role in the story of crime and revenge, which builds the narrative of the Persian Wars, was paramount. Once he heard of it, Darius shot an arrow in the direction of heaven and prayed to Zeus, or Ahura Mazda, to grant him revenge on the perpetrators. Even if he singled out Athenians in Herodotus' usual disdain for the Ionians, he expresses a firm belief that the Ionians would not go unpunished. Thus, the partially true story of the fire destruction of Didyma belongs in the Herodotean chain of events, illustrating his religious explanation of the Persian Wars. Thank you very much.